All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NDT webinar, where we'll go over the key changes of the newly released or revised NDT specific criteria document, which in future or throughout this presentation, I will call just simply the NDT Annex. Thanks so much for attending today and making time today. It's great to see so many people making time, and I hope we have some good questions, good discussions around these changes. I will quickly share my screen and then we can start. Right, hopefully everybody can see this PowerPoint slide. Yeah, again, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Eddy Current. I'm a Deputy Sector Manager for the Materials, Assets and Products sector within NATA. I'm based in Perth and I'm in this role now for approximately 3 years. The purpose of today's session is to provide an overview of the key changes that we introduced in the revised NATA Specific Accreditation Criteria for non-destructive testing, or simply the NDT Annex. So the revised NDT Annex was released in May 2026, and it supersedes the July 2019 version. And we gave you 3 months time to get your head around it, so it will come into effect in August 2026. So we thought it's quite a timely to have this webinar and go through the changes and hopefully have some good questions regarding these. Just to a note, I put in the chat the new document. So if you want to have that open, maybe on the side, in the chat is a link to the new NDT Annex. Before we start, I will also cover a few housekeeping points. So at the moment, all microphones of the NTs have been muted. We are a fairly big group today, so this is to minimize disruptions and background noise. My plan is to go through each updated section and allow time for questions at the end of each section. So I encourage you all to ask questions. To ask a question, please use the raise hand function within Teams. And then Anne-Marie will enable your microphone. You still have to unmute yourself and then please ask your question. It is quite tricky. I ask you to not overuse or not use the chat too much because it's quite tricky to manage side conversations while we're having this webinar. So yeah, questions, please raise your hand using the Teams function and then we will answer them or go through them. I will try to answer as many questions as I can, but for the more technical questions, we're very lucky today that we have Mark Booth with us, who I will probably throw the more technical questions to. Also on the call today from NATA is our Sector Manager, Diane Hobday, our Deputy Sector Manager, Nick DeCrash, and Technical Specialist, Mitchell Opwood, and our Technical Support Officer, Anne-Marie Rigby, who has been super helpful setting this webinar up. Okay, I'm going to the next slide now. And I just want to give a quick overview of the structure of the NDT Annex. Hopefully you have all seen it. As with all our criteria documents, the clause numbering is aligned with 17025, with the clause numbering in 17025. So in the general part of the NDT Annex that covers clause 5, 6, and 7, which relate to the structural, resource, and process requirements. And the Annex also includes then specific or technique-specific appendices, A to F, for the common NDT techniques, as well as Appendix G, which addresses requirements about NDT worksites, and we cover that later. In general, the Annex has been revised quite comprehensively. So we also included many editorial changes to improve readability and clarity around the requirements. But I want to start really with a big picture overview of the main changes, or the 3 key changes that I think have been made to this NDT revision, NDT Annex revision. So firstly, we strengthened the requirements around the level 3 technical control, specifically in relation to level 3 coverage and involvement. Then we expanded the NDT Annex to cover advanced non-destructive testing techniques, specifically phased array, TOFD, computed and digital radiography, but we also added information regarding advanced eddy current techniques. Thirdly, there was quite a substantial rewrite and update to the NDT worksite framework, which again is in Appendix G, and we cover towards the end of this webinar. I really want to acknowledge the input and work of our NDT Advisory Committee, who throughout this update have put in a lot of work and informed a lot of the technical or the updates and technical updates with this NDT Annex revision. So thank you very much. Okay, coming to the main changes, I'm going through the general part now. And first of all, the structural requirements. Main updates here are within section 5.5, which deals with the level 3 technical control. For yourself, you can look at page 5, clause 5.5. And in the July version from 2019, the annex stated basically where the person responsible for technical control did not hold level 3 certification and method, the facility should ensure level 3 coverage from another source. This wording has been strengthened now, and in the new annex, we basically made that to a shall, so from a should to a shall, so the facility shall ensure level 3 coverage from another source if the organization doesn't have level 3 coverage in a relevant primary test method itself. And this also aligns with clause 6.22 of the annex, which already states that level 3 coverage is required for the primary NDT methods. So just some strengthening of the wording here. Similarly with level 3 coverage for advanced methods, we strengthened, or we made an expectation to a requirement. So in the old annex, it states that where testing activities include phased array and TOFD, it is expected that personnel holds an independent endorsement for these techniques, equivalent to ISO 9712 level 2 or higher. So an expectation. In the new annex, this is now a requirement, and we say shall hold an independent endorsement for these techniques that are equivalent to ISO 9712 level 2 or higher. And this has been also expanded from phased array to TOFD to include SIA and DR for wells, so radiographic testing, SIA and DR for wells. Further on the technical control and more on the involvement of level 3 personnel, we state that, and this is basically related to when a level 3 is not based at the facility. This may apply to multi-site facilities where technical control is provided across several locations, or where facilities engage external level 3s. So it was always a requirement to define the involvement of the level 3, including minimum visit frequencies. However, in the new NDT Annex, we have strengthened it to make, or strengthened that requirement to make clear that specific records are to be maintained and will be reviewed during NATA assessments. So we didn't describe exactly which records are expected, but examples could be internal audits that a level 3 conducts, report reviews, time logged on when the level 3 was on site, procedure reviews, all these sort of things. So we're putting a stronger emphasis on having actual traceable records for level 3 involvement. These are the main updates for this section, the structural requirements. I would open the floor now for questions, if there are any questions regarding these updates. Or Mark, please jump in anytime if you want to add to any of the topics.
No raised hands, Andy. You can...
No questions? Okay. We will probably have time at the end as well, so I'm happy to take questions at the end and we can go back. All right, section 6 is around resource requirements. So this includes personnel and equipment. First update we made is about testing personnel approvals. This update is on page 11, clause 626. We added a new paragraph, basically giving some guidance around when a testing facility performs testing under multiple standards, that the level 3 must evaluate the tester's understanding of each applicable standard. So, for example, a NDT technician may be competent in an Australian standard method, however, might not understand or might not be across the subtle different requirements or specific requirements in an ISO or ASME standard. So we thought it's useful to put this paragraph in and recommend that facilities maintain clear approval records. In some cases, a broader approval might be acceptable depending on the complexity of the testing the facility does. But in other cases, the approval should be probably quite specific to the standard, the technique, or the company procedure. Following on in section 6 as well around equipment, this is on page 12. We added a new section in regarding to NDT consumables. This came basically from feedback and discussions during assessments. And we thought this also would be quite a good guidance or requirements what to do with consumables, specifically penetrant and magnetic particle consumables. So the new paragraph reads, consumable must be stored and used in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations and should be discarded on the stated expiry date or recommended shelf life. And this is probably as strong should as there is. However, if a facility wants to use or uses the consumable beyond the manufacturer expiry date, the onus is really on the facility to prove that the consumable does not adversely affect the outcome of the test and need to do the required validation and checks prior to each use, and of course keep the record so this can be assessed. These were the two changes to section 6, resource requirements. Are there any questions in regards to that?
Andy, can I just add a little bit into that we're discussing there with the consumables?
Yeah.
Different manufacturers have different shelf lives, expiry dates. Some don't have any expiry dates at all. Some you can only find on their websites, and so we've got to be a little bit pragmatic about this one. If a chemical supplier doesn't supply an expiry date, then we would kind of expect that 3 years would be a reasonable shelf life before you start to perform these validations. In lieu of that, then the manufacturer's recommendations are kind of the primary driver for how long you can use these consumables. Some manufacturers are saying 5 years, some say 3 years, some say 3 years from date of delivery. So it's up to the facilities to monitor the expiry dates on those and have a system in place And that would include something like a procedure on how you would monitor that, and also records. So whether you have an assessment, we've got that verifiable evidence there.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks for adding this. That sounds good. Okay, no questions.
No
Last
questions.
chance. Okay, coming to section 7 of the NDT Annex, process requirements. Here the main changes are around the competency assessment. The first one, clause 771 on page 15 and 16. We updated basically or revised the term in-house competency assessment and that has been changed to individual competency assessment. The requirement itself has not changed. So there's always been the requirement for 5-yearly competency assessment. In each test method, the technician is approved. However, we changed the wording because we found it confusing, and also to recognize that practical examination by an external party or qualification program are also deemed a valid competency assessment. So these competency assessments may be conducted internally, also externally, and that's why we changed these the wording here to clarify it. Also, we added a paragraph on page 16 that these assessment records, which is probably fairly self-explanatory, but shall be kept confidential and secured to prevent unauthorized access by other personnel in the organization. And that's specifically important, I guess, if a facility runs in-house competency assessment, that nobody unauthorized has access to these assessment records. Additionally to the in-house or individual competency assessment, I must say, was always clause 772. That's a requirement, ISO 17025, which requires external proficiency or comparison testing. So here we have also tightened the requirements. In the old version of the NDT Annex, it was an expectation to participate in external competency assessment at least once every 2 years. This is now a shall or a must. So each facility must plan and participate in external competency assessment at least once every 2 years. And also for applicant facilities. In the old version, it stated that participation is encouraged before accreditation is granted. This is now a requirement. So new applicant facilities must complete an external competency assessment prior to initial accreditation. And this aligns with the general NATA policy around external comparison testing and proficiency testing, that this must be completed before accreditation is granted. Any questions so these were the main updates for section 7. Are there any questions in regards to section 7 competency assessments?
Andy, just the about the new applicant facilities. They must complete an external competency, not necessarily all methods. So we expect that they do at least one method.
Yeah, correct.
For new applicants, yeah. So, but not necessarily all. If they wish to do all, fantastic. But if they, the expectation is they will have done one.
Yeah, exactly. So the external competency assessment is additionally to an overall sort of competency framework of the facility. That's also level 3 with heavy level 3 input. And the external competency assessment is there to also assess company-specific requirements or company-specific issues like reporting, how a facility reports, how the job planning is going, how the worksheets are looking. So that's part of the external competency assessment. And yeah, it should reflect the complexity of the whole facility. So if you have all six NDT methods, you shouldn't just do magnetic particle every 2 years. So it should, you should take that into consideration. But yeah, for new applicants, one external competency assessment and one technique would be sufficient here. Okay, any questions to that? That would bring up, yep. Yes, Pia. We can, Anne-Marie, can you?
Just Bill.
Yes, Pia, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear fine?
Yeah. All right. So I'm in the process getting NATA accreditations, and I did not hear the stuff you explained earlier. So I'm getting 4 to 5 method approval from NATA. So my understanding is like I spoken with the level 3. And if I go to issue 1, then I don't need to do external competency. But for issue 2, definitely I need get external competency approval from the third party. Is it right? Every 2 years I need to get external competency for my business. So if I'm getting like 5 methods not accreditation, then I need to just sit for one method external competency, or need to sit for all 5 methods external competency for my business?
No, you don't need to. It's not a requirement to do all 5 methods as an external competency. We encourage you to take into consideration the complexity of the testing you're doing, but that's a discussion with you also and the level 3, what you think appropriate. And in the end of the day, is your risk mitigation and assurance that your test results are valid that you produce doing this external competency assessment. In terms of the individual competency assessment, yes, issue 1, because a practical examination was part of that, is accepted, but it needs to be for each technician and each method they approved to.
So Jasper, can I just jump in? So there's 2 separate requirements. So we've got the requirement for individual competency assessment, which aligns with your ISO 9712 certification. So every 5 years you need to do a individual competency in each method, but your facility, your business also needs to do an external competency assessment every 2 years, rotating through all the methods that would be on your scope of accreditation. So they are 2 separate items. Although there could be some overlap. So you may use, I'll give an example. You have an external competency assessment provided by, an external level 3 that covers the external competency assessment for the business, but you could use the results for that for the individual competency for the 5-year point for an individual competency as well. So you can cover both with one, but they are 2 separate requirements.
Yeah, I know. It's one for the technician, one for the business. Yes.
Yeah.
I understand this. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Paul's asked the question in the chat as well, Andy. Paul Grosser.
Anne-Marie, could you unmute Paul and get to his question?
Go ahead, Paul.
No, it's just as it's written in the chat. I think the chat's a bit clearer than the microphone.
So does the level 3 need to hold the applicable level 2, or can they appoint a level 2 in that advanced method? I believe the discussions were around the level 3 would have to hold, say, UT3 and phased array level 2 pull. I think that was the that's where we came out, and similarly for the advanced RT. So you'd hold a level 3 in RT, but you could hold a level 2 in CRDR. But you couldn't kind of assign that technical responsibility to someone without a level 3.
I think that's a fairly important point that would need to be clarified.
Yeah, we'll take that one on board, Paul. We have discussed updating the annex because a little bit of feedback came back as well. So that's something that might come out in the next one. But that's, yeah, the intent was level 3 in the main method and level 2 in the advanced method.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's, I guess that's that was the intent in the new updated NDT Annex, that the technical controller has these independent endorsements. Jasper, are you still having a question, or have you just?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, can you lower your hand, please?
Andy, Matthew Palm has a question.
Yes, Matthew, please.
Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
Cheers. So Mark, that kind of makes sense to me for test methods where there isn't an available level 3 certification scheme. So maybe CRDR, maybe some of the other advanced methods, but you can get level 3 certified in TOFD and PAUT. So that kind of doesn't make sense to me that you can have level 3 in the conventional method and only level 2 in the advanced method.
I mean, it's a kind of transition, Matt, because we recognise some of the smaller facilities don't have, they just don't have the resources to have a level 3 in all methods, including the phased array CRDR. So we're encouraging that they should hold level 3 in those, but what we're saying is, as a minimum, this is a requirement at the moment. Yeah, as the certifications become more common and more prevalent through the industry, then I think we're going to move on to that one. But just kind of changing a rule kind of immediately is going to put a lot of laboratories, at risk, really, to not be able to maintain those ones. So for the larger organisations, I'm not going to mention your organisation, but for the larger organisations, it's easy where you've got multiple level 3s with multiple methods. But for some of the smaller ones, it's quite an imposition to kind of just throw this one out there and go, right, in 2 months' time, you can no longer do phased array and TOFD.
Yeah, but they already have the facility of being able to engage an external level 3 if they don't have level 3 capability in house. So there's already capacity for them to do something about that.
Yeah, I think the level 3s, in phased array, TOFD, and these advanced methods, hopefully they're coming more and more, but they might be still limited. So as Mark explained, it's sort of a transition from just being purely an expectation to have any sort of independent endorsement, that now at least the technical controller shall hold a qualification in these advanced methods to level 2 or higher. So it's a move and recognizing maturity of these test methods and the certification schemes as well.
So there are changes planned, Matt. So it's not, these aren't going to be the rules for the next 20 years. We're constant. We're in a position now of constantly reviewing the documents. So it will change, but like I said, to do that step change immediately is going to be quite an imposition on some people. But yeah, it's something that we will be looking at. And so by all means, put it through to NATA, because it's obviously something we have to discuss at the committee level, and the sector has to discuss and things like that. So making the changes isn't a quick thing in the first place, but yeah, it's something we are monitoring.
Yeah, thank you for this discussion. Thank you, Paul and Matthew, for the questions. Peter, please ask your question.
Hey, Peter.
Andy, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. I just think there's some unintended consequences for the interpretation, just given it 5.5 there. So there would be organisations already in place with a level 3 who's the technical controller for all methods, but they have delegated the specific technical control responsibilities for some of the advanced methods to a person with level 2. So if you implement as discussed by Mark just then, there'll be some level 3s that immediately have to rush off and get level 2 certification in phased array and TOFD, for instance, because they won't have coverage any other way. So I'm not sure that was the intended outcome. So they would already have accreditation using technical controllers at level 2.
Yeah, understand. I think that's something we need to take back to the committee. The intention was that the level 3 also, and a lot of the NDT facilities that have phased array and TOFD actually have level 3s engaged, and they can also engage external level 3s. But yeah, I think it's definitely a topic to discuss and possibly clarify.
Yeah, so the reading, if you read the clause, the revised clause in new 2026, so at the moment it says the person responsible for oversight of such tests, that would appear to imply that person can be a different one to the nominated level 3.
Yeah, understood. I think we will discuss this in the
anyway, just wanted to
take that.
Wanted to highlight that as a possible unintended consequence. That's all, or maybe an intended consequence. I don't know, but just FYI, I think that would affect some labs and more, perhaps more than you would think.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Cheers, Peter. Well, we've got another committee meeting coming up soon, so that is something we'll look at there.
Yep, sure, no worries.
Thank you. Okay, being mindful of time, we're gonna move on. We've gone through all the changes of the general part. I will quickly stop sharing, because now I will actually move on to the share the actual NDT document, the NDT Annex, and we now going over the appendices, the technique specific requirements. I hope that's all big enough for everybody. And going over, just give me 1 second. And going over each appendix and the changes. All right, so radiographic testing, basically the new annex also includes now requirements and guidance around computed and digital radiography. Here the changes, I highlighted all the changes in yellow that we've made, and for these appendices, mostly they were additions. So I thought it's easier to go through them on the actual appendix. The first one is in the equipment table for CR and DR 6410, and just a note on these equipment tables, these are provided as guidance and not intended to be complete lists. We think they are useful to include in these criteria documents as for facilities, for technical assessors and our lead assessors, to have some sort of what are the common expectations around this equipment, but they are not intended to be a complete list. So whatever standard or product code you're testing to, these still take priority, and you need to meet all the requirements of the standard that you're testing to. So for SIA and DIA, we now included equipment checks or common equipment checks regarding the imaging plates, digital detector arrays, and the viewing monitors. That's for equipment. In regards to Section 7 and the procedural requirements, so for SIA and DIA techniques, we now have included requirements that need to be in your work procedures. These are mainly around image quality, how you select your exposure parameters, how you control digital processing function, like using filters, contrast, that you can do with all these digital images, and how you validate techniques, specifically if they're not based on a published standard. Then we have added requirements that need to be recorded on your test record or on your worksheet. Here we have added imaging plate type that needs to be recorded when you're doing sort of these digital techniques, the achieved minimum signal to noise ratio, and other details around the detector, pixel size, spatial resolution, again, what imaging processing parameters have been used, for example, and what software has been used, or details around the software. These are the additions to SIA DIA. Are there any questions around this? If not, then we move on to Appendix B, which is all around ultrasonic testing. The first addition was a new paragraph in the scope of accreditation section. And here, this also came from feedback from multiple assessments in regards to ultrasonic testing of welds on non-ferritic materials, so stainless steel, duplex steels. And it was recognized that, well, when we did the assessments, many times we went to the assessment and the facility lacked the correct procedures, lacked the correct equipment and technical knowledge. So we wanted to put an emphasis on this, that NATA is looking at, if you have that on your scope, that we will increasingly looking at that, and that will be a sort of focus at the assessment if you have welded joint of stainless steels on your scope for ultrasonic testing. While we recognize that you might not always have, when we come to an assessment, you haven't always have a stainless steel weld here for testing, then we would revert to robust technical discussions and reviewing previous test reports and test records. Did you want to add anything to that, Mark, or does that cover?
Yeah, just adding on to what you just said there, Andy, we recognise that organising a demonstration, a real field demonstration on a non-ferritic weld, will be really, really difficult for most facilities. So we don't necessarily expect you to have an actual stainless steel weld to be tested on the day, but we would expect that you would have the probes, specific technique sheets, examples of previous tests that you've done, so test reports, validation reports, something like that. So it's, don't be frightened that you're going to be expected to find a vessel with a stainless steel weld in there for the demonstration. There are alternatives. It would be great if you could demonstrate an actual stainless steel weld being tested, but we recognise that's not always possible.
Thank you, Mark. Going on, we added, in terms of equipment, we added requirements around the advanced duty equipment and what sort of checks are expected. So this is around the acquisition systems, regular performance checks of these, specifically around encoders, scanners, what software and acquisition system you have in place, and what operators are trained and certified in accordance with the applicable technique. So this is around UT equipment, and we actually included a new equipment table for performance checks on phased array and TOFD. So as I mentioned, it's around the UT instruments, UT or TOFD instruments, scanners, encoders, and the analysis software that you use. Regarding the technical records, so what needs to be recorded when you do phased array or TOFD, we added scan plans, scan type, what sort of wedge probe parameters you use, scanner encoder type parameters, focal law parameters, scan datums, and again, the software version and analysis method is important to record. These are the additions for UT or the advanced methods. Are there any questions regarding this?
No
No
hands,
question. Thank you. All right, the next appendices are for magnetic particle, Appendix C, and Appendix D is penetrant testing. They really had minimal revision. All we did is to also include now reference to commonly used ISO standards in the performance check table. So for magnetic particle, we also included the ISO 9934 reference to these and possible or expected performance checks. And for the penetrant testing, we have included similarly ISO 3452, and yeah, that's alongside the AS 262. So these were the only revisions to these two appendices. Any questions? Okay, then we can move on to the next one, which is visual testing. And here I just want a disclaimer. So under 17025, NATA has always offered a limited accreditation coverage for visual testing as an adjunct method to an overall NDT service. And so visual testing may be performed on test items while other non-destructive testing is also carried out on the item. So with the revised annex, we try to further clarify the limits of what may be accredited under ISO 17025 for both pre-service visual testing and in-service visual testing. So we added a paragraph here that pre-service visual testing covers or is limited to the assessment of the completed weld and does not include the assessment or acceptance of welding parameters, welding consumables, welding fit up, and the preparation of the weld. All this would be typically or the responsibility of a welding inspector, which can be accredited under 17020, so the inspection standard, but is not covered under 17025. For in-service visual testing, we also added a new paragraph, more text around what ISO 17025 covers for in-service visual testing and what is not covered. So ISO 17025 for in-service visual testing can be done for detection of in-service flaws, cracks, mechanical damage, or corrosion. However, it doesn't cover investigative testing or failure analysis or making a statement of the origin of the flaw. So this is not covered under 17025. For the personnel requirement, we now added that if a standard specifies particular qualifications or certification, then the tester or the NDT technician must satisfy these requirements, except they have been explicitly documented by the client that this is not required. So NATA currently does not mandate a formal VT qualification. However, if the standard requires the standard, the applicable test standard, then these requirements must be met. Towards equipment, we strengthen the text here for periodic checks for equipment that is commonly used for visual testing, mainly all types of welding gauges. So periodic checks are required and records kept. Also for welding gauges, we would expect to at least have an initial conformance certificate for these type of equipment. Process requirements, an update regarding if the standard requires a minimum or specifies minimum light intensity, these lighting conditions must be recorded on your record sheet. So these are the updates to visual testing. Are there any questions regarding visual testing under 1705?
No hands, Andy.
Thank you. Appendix F, electromagnetic testing, technical requirements. For personnel, we added requirements around specific training, certification, or competency records. If advanced techniques are performed by a technician, and also that competency must be demonstrating in developing setup files and complex data sets. Additionally, in regards to equipment, and this is more in regards to testing wells through conductive coatings, we just wanted to put in there as a benefit to the facilities, to the technical assessors, lead assessors, that we expect to have appropriate calibration blocks. So testing welding through conductive coatings, the calibration block must have a coating of the same chemical composition, must have been applied in the same process and the same thickness as the specimen under test. This is the addition for equipment. And we added expectations around performance checks for the advanced methods, ACFM, and checks for your eddy current array probes. So basically function checks before use. Procedural requirements. Yes, Paul.
Sorry, just going back to the eddy current section 6.41, when testing welds through conductive coatings, there's a feature within the ISO standard for weld testing that requires that an assessment be done with an absolute probe to show 5% variability or 5 degree variability in the liftoff, which would identify the fact that the coatings are the same. This additional statement, one, renders that test irrelevant, but also makes pretty well any testing of old items that have, say, lead-based paint on it, impossible to test. This has been already considered and applied to the weld testing standard through the use of this 5 degree test.
Yeah, but Paul, that's for identifying if it's a conductive coating, though, isn't it? That it doesn't necessarily, you can't necessarily measure the thickness of that. So what the intent here was that if you're testing through that conductive coating, you've got basically got to be able to prove that you can find the defects through that specific coating process and thickness. So the one that's in the ISO standard isn't used for the liftoff, because it doesn't work through highly conductive coatings like TSA and even GAL, really, does it? So what we're saying here is you need to be able to prove that you can find defects if you're going to test through conductive coatings.
This, however, would, like, there are so many old bridges and the like that have lead-based coatings that you would consider conductive, but have minimal effect. They meet the 5% rule, but by having such a broad statement that says when testing welds through conductive coatings, I think it should have been technically assessed to say when welds tested through conductive coatings that don't meet the 5% rule or the 5-degree rule. But this is going to...
Right, I understand. Yeah, so you're saying for low conductivity coatings, Paul?
Yes, like obviously galvanizing and things like that, I 100% agree. But
yeah, no, I understand what you said. Yes, yeah, we need to look at that then.
Okay,
Yeah,
we take that back.
I get you there, Paul. We kind of, we jumped to the TSA galv coating rather than, slightly conducting coatings. So yeah, that's something we can revisit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mark. Okay, moving on. Where did we stop? Yeah, again, in your procedure, for, again, testing welds through conductive coatings, we now have certain requirements around the details of the coating, the calibration blocks used, and what method you used for measuring the thickness of these coatings. Technical records, again, around that need to be recorded around the instrument setup, what probes you used, the calibration checks, and again, software and which settings you used. So being mindful of time, maybe we take one question for that, but then I would like to move on to the Appendix G if there's a question. Okay, that brings us to Appendix G and NDT worksites. This appendix basically details the arrangements or types of arrangements that might be encountered by non-destructive testing facilities, where testing is done away from a base site, and the procedures for the establishment, the notification requirements, and how we would assess these work sites away from the base site. So the revised annex basically defines 3 types of offsite work and includes now a table to hopefully better distinguish between what we would call jobbing work, which does not need specific notification to NATA, and routine and major construction sites, which are quite different, and NATA needs to be notified of these so we can properly assess them and they can be recognized under the NATA accreditation. So we made this table with some sort of requirements, examples, typical arrangements for these to better distinguish what is jobbing work and what is a notified work site, routine or major construction site. So the first jobbing work, that covers basically ad hoc short-term callouts for non-destructive testing that is performed at a client site. And in these cases, the work is usually managed and controlled totally by the base site. The personnel has regular interaction with the base site staff and normally mobilizes to the client, to the job from the base site. The technical control stays within the base site, and normally also the equipment is at the base site and then gets taken from there to the client side. And jobbing work does not require specific notification to NATA, as this is recognized that it's basically routine day-to-day business for most NDT facilities. Quite different routine and major construction work sites. Here, examples for routine site would be, for example, oil and gas platform maintenance contracts at a refinery or gas plant. Examples for major construction site would be, for example, a new pipeline construction of major infrastructure, or new plant construction. So here notification is required. Arrangements are normally that these are sort of more long-term contracts. The personnel might have limited interaction with the base site and works on a fly-in, fly-out basis, or is already close to that, lives close to the work site and mobilizes directly to the work site without having too much interaction possibly with the base site. Also, there might be some sort of local technical control at the work site. So there might be, for example, a site supervisor who manages some sort of incoming work requests, operation control, and test records are stored locally. Test records are stored locally and test reports issued locally. So this is how we would determine or distinguish between jobbing work and routine and major construction sites that require a notification to NATA. So to establish a work site, NATA or the facility must inform NATA as soon as possible. Once the facility decided to establish a work site or has been awarded a contract and is going ahead with the work. And this is still done with the NDT worksite advice form that's on the NATA website. A new change is that once the worksite has been recognized, it will be publicly listed on the scope of accreditation under the base site scope. Assessment of or assessment arrangements for work sites. These notified work sites, routine or major construction, depend on the type of the work site. So for major construction work sites, which are perceived higher risk because they are new constructions, NATA would generally try to do a visit in the first 2 to 6 months. While for routine work sites, we may assess that as part of the routine assessments for the base site. And if there's additional time required, that would be chargeable. Or we might also do separate visits to a work site if that's appropriate, or if we determine that we haven't, or that's the first work site for a facility, for example, that established. So we want confidence that all the requirements are in place and arrangements are in place. But yeah, that's we can do that during the routine assessment or separate visits. So these are sort of the updates for NDT work sites. Are there any questions regarding the work site framework? Okay, if there's no questions, that's it. I'll be right on time in 1 hour. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the discussions. And we take these points back that might need further clarification. Again, you can always contact your client coordinator or your NATA contact, and we will try to respond through the appropriate NATA channels. Thank you all, and thank you for having attended this webinar.